Hello YouTube. Hi, this is the Truly Stupid Noob. This is part 3. This is part 3 of the tutorial for Darkrift. So where we left off, we were able to create a plugin called the Login plugin for Darkrift 2. And we downloaded the MySQL connector, but we haven't used it yet. And we created the network tags, which defines the ushorts that we use for client and server communication. We also set up a very basic scene for Unity, and today we want to connect to MySQL, create a new user, and to log in. So let's create a new DLL. I know there's a lot of DLLs, so let me explain what we are creating exactly. So over here, we've created login plugin, and we have created MySQL connector. You could use the login plugin to connect to MySQL connector, but that's not how I want to do it. I want to create a new DLL, and this will be responsible for doing the MySQL connector calls, and none of these 4 plugins will make a single SQL call. So all these 4 plugins will call server data structure, and server data structure will be the one to call MySQL connector. That will put all of my SQL calls into one class and not to have dependencies for all 4 of our plugins. So let's create a new Visual Studio 2017. We will create a new server data structure. So this will be our communication with SQL. Here, so server data structure. YouTube tutorials, that's good. The first thing I want to do is a lot of these MySQL calls can fail. And a lot of times I use a bool to say if it fails or if it succeeds. But sometimes a bool isn't enough. If it fails, how did it fail? So I want to return more than just a bool. So I want to return a complex class. So I will call this result, and there will be 2 types of result. One of them is generic, one of them is not generic. So first of all, we want to return the bool is success. That is our standard success bool that we usually return. But on top of that, we want to return a string error. If a success is false, we will read error to find out what's the problem. And finally, we have a public t value. So for example, when we create and fetch a user account, we fetch it into value, but we also want to find out if value is failed and why it failed. So this class will help us do that. So public class, I'm going to copy and paste this. The only difference is that there's no t and there is no value. So I'm going to define the constructor for this. So bool is success and string error equals this. So there's a default value. And success equals is success. Error equals error. I'll copy and paste this over here. So this one will not have a 3rd parameter, but that's okay. We'll work on that later. Well, actually, this is fine the way it is. What I mean is, okay. So let's create our user account. So this class will encapsulate the idea of a user account, but it will sort of act as a static factory, so that we and also as a as data. So what does user account have? It has an int, which is the index. So get I'll write get private set. Why is the set private for ID? Because this ID, it's the ID from SQL. SQL never changes the ID, so this will never change. There's no reason to change it. So public string username, again, get and private set. Now we could store a password, but I don't think it's a good idea because we don't need to store the password. Once we get the data from MySQL, we should have already entered the correct password. We don't care about the password. We don't want to store a password. It's sensitive, right? So public static void initialize table. So what does this function do? Right now, if you take a look at MySQL, oh, did I just kill MySQL? No, it's fine. It's running. It's fine. Okay. So if you, I'm gonna delete this. Delete drop table. Drop now. Okay. So now we don't have a user table, so our Darkrift server will fail. But if we initialize the table every time we boot it up, it will never fail because the table will always be there. So that's what we want. But before we can initialize the table, we need to import our MySQL connector. So if you don't have this, you can download it from the description for this video. MySQL connector. And we need to start using MySQL connector. All right. So if you take a look at the interface, there are 3 functions that we're interested in. The first one is execute non-query. It returns a void. Execute query. It returns a dictionary with string and object. And execute scalar. It returns an object. So this is used for anything that any non-query, basically, just like the name says. Queries fetch data. So if you want data, you use execute query. If you don't want to fetch data, for example, you just want to update or create or delete, you can use execute non-query. This is a bit more efficient, so use this whenever you could. So this takes a string and optional parameters. So create table if not exists user. So the table name is called users. So now we'll define the fields. First of all, we want an ID for every table. So int not null auto increment primary key. So that's our main key. Then username. You can put whatever you want. I put 15, but you don't have to put 15. If you want long usernames, you can put more. Password. I put 50, but you can put less or more if you want. And that's it for this. Should be fine. Okay, so we initialize the table. We'll call this in our login plugin. The next thing we want to do is we want to create a user. Because we don't have any users right now. So public bool. No, we're not going to return a bool. We're going to return a result that we created. And it's going to return a user account. So it's going to become a factory method. Because it's a factory method, it's going to be static. Add user to database. String username, string password. Since SQL's queries can fail, it might be nice to put as many tries you want here. So try and catch. So we'll be using try and catch for the next two functions. Okay, so now we are going to execute a non-query because we're not interested in fetching any data. All we do is want to insert a new user. So insert into users. So we have to provide the fields for the user. The reason we're not inserting the integer is because it will be automatically created. If you see auto increment, there will be an integer int ID that will be assigned to us automatically. We don't have to do it. So values, username, password. New key value pair. Username, username. And I'll copy this and paste it over here. So you may be wondering, okay, so this is the non-query or query. What is this? These are parameters, key value pairs. You see these at symbols? These define variables inside the query. So anything with an at symbol is going to be replaced by the matching name. So here is at username. It will find the variable username and insert this value in here. Same with here at password. It's going to find the matching string and insert the object. Let's do something different. Let's do something like banana, right? So this will fail because it won't. Is this banana? No, that's not a banana. It's a username. Is this a banana? Nope, that's not a banana. It's a password. So it'll be like, where is banana? We want to find banana so we can insert the value. So we have to match it. Banana. Now, banana will be replaced by username. So that's how these values work. They're just like a copy and replace. All right. So I'm going to put username here. So that's what it is. Okay. And why do we use something like this rather than just insert the username? Why can't I do something like plus username, right? Just inject it directly. The reason is because this makes the program vulnerable to SQL injection. So it's a nasty thing that hackers can do to your SQL queries to make it do things that you definitely do not want. So it's not safe. I wanted to do this because I wanted my SQL to be faster, but no matter where I look, everyone tells me to always use parameters because otherwise you can't defend against hackers and stuff like that. So, all right. So, next thing we're going to do is we've inserted a new user. So technically, if we get the user now, we should be able to get it. So we need to get it in order to see if it worked. But how do we get it? We need to define a new function, unfortunately. So let's copy and paste this. We'll call this get user. Okay, how about get user from credentials? So again, it takes a username and password, but this time it's a query. So execute query. Instead of insert, we want to select ID from users where username equals username and password equals password. And I think we're going to limit 1. Okay, so this is pretty much the same. Um, where username equals username, so this will be replaced by the value in the string, key value pair. And this returns data, right? So we need to match the data as a dictionary string object, I think. I call it rows. I think. No, it's an array of dictionaries. Wow. Okay. So we fetch the data from MySQL. If everything is good, this row will have some data in it. So we are going to check to see if the rows have any data. If length is equal to 1, because we expect one return. If we don't have any data, we need to return failure, right? So do you remember we were returning a result? So let's create a new result. Return new result is false, and the error is cannot find user. So great. So if the length is 1, then actually let's put this over here. So it's easier to read positives. So if equals is fine, if not, then it's failed. Okay. So um, if we have some data, then we need to get data from the rows. So how do we do that? Let's go ID. Sorry. Okay, we'll create a new user. So user account equal new user account. But the ID is rows dot, sorry. We know that there's one item in it, so for sure we can put 0 without going over. And now we have to enter a key. So what's the key? The key is whatever we selected over here. So if we selected ID, we will have a key called ID. If we selected something else, you can also enter that. But if we enter something like this, username, this will fail. How come it will fail? Because we did not select the username. If we selected username, then we'll be able to fetch username, but we did not select it. Okay, so we'll have to make do with ID over here. But this won't work. How come? Because this is an object. It will return an object, I think, right? Yes. So we need to cast it. So since ID is an int, we need to convert to int 32. And we need our username. Something is wrong. Ah, I see what's wrong. So we're in the middle of a constructor. What is username? We can get our username from here because we did the query with the username, so for sure this username is correct, right? So username equals username. Alright. So what happens if we encounter an exception? So we'll do something like this. So we'll just send the exception message and we'll read it somewhere else. So this is still complaining because not all paths return a value. So we return the value here, we return the value here, so we need to return the value here. So result equal new result. So is success? Yes, is success. True. No error. And user account. No. So I'm sorry I'm getting sidetracked because um, I was at work for 8 hours today. Great, so let's return this. Alright, so this is done. Now we can call it. Remember, we just created a new user, so we want to fetch it to see if it works. Result user account equals okay, so we need to check if this is a success. So if get user result is success, then we should return get user result. Right? Else, we're going to copy and paste this. And we'll just send the exception message. Okay, so this is done. Hopefully this works. Alright, so we can begin to use this. Let's copy the DLL into Darkrift after compiling it in release. Okay, so before I boot this, I need to make an update to login plugin. So let's look for login plugin. Is this the right one? I think it is. How come we're making an update to login plugin? Because we need to use the server data structure to do our login. We also need to create the table, right? So these are only methods. We need to call these methods. First of all, we reference our new class, server data structure. Okay. Oh, it already exists. It looks like I imported earlier, so we're going to delete this because this might be outdated. Okay. Oh boy. I think that this is this the right version? Let me double check. So I'm sorry. Nope, this is not the right version. So I was wrong. Perhaps this is the right version. Okay, this is the right version. Okay. Sorry about that. So we need to import server data structure. Make sure that I got the right YouTube tutorials. Okay, this is good. First thing we want to do is in the constructor, we'll call create table, initialize table. So user account. Oh. Aha! Is there something wrong with this? I think I need to make this public. I'll try to copy this fast. Oh, this should update automatically, I think. So let's try again. user account initialize table. Okay, the next thing we need to do is replace this with actual SQL methods. So if we get a message for logging in, this is okay. So login attempt. This is fine, but this is not fine, alright? So user account. We got our username and password here. So when message received is called, whenever the network tag is login, the client will be sending the app version, the user data, and the password in that order. So we should be able to read all three of them and send them to MySQL to verify if that's the correct username and password. Because don't forget, these come from the user, right? They might be incorrect. So we need to double check to make sure it's correct. So we are asking SQL, do we have an account that matches username and password? And if we get something, then user account result will be success, is success. So if is success, so let's try to replace the ID. So here we write the ID. It's not 0, it's value.id. Okay. And everything looks okay. If it fails, we want to debug log why it failed. So let's add the error message over here. So add the error message error. That will help us debug why it failed. Also, one thing I didn't do in the previous tutorial is I put an empty Darkrift writer in message.create. You don't have to do that. In fact, there's another method called message.createEmpty, and that will allow us to remove this parameter. It's also probably more efficient. So let's do that for all of our calls. No, that's fine. That's fine. So I'm checking to see if we have everything we want. I think we can log in, but we cannot create an account. We're missing an account create. So we need to define that. Unfortunately, we don't have the network tag for this. So we need to open the network tag to make sure this is the right version. No, this is the wrong version. It should be in here. Okay, we have 5 network tags defined. The important one: login, log out, login failed, and login success. We want 3 more. Let's copy and paste. So the first one will be called create account. So it's going to be sent by a client, and it's going to be a string username, string password. And it expects a create account failed, create account failed already exists, and create account success. How about that? So we need one more. The first is called create account failed. Create account failed already exists. So this is when someone tries to create a username that already exists. So if Bob already exists and they try to create Bob again, you can't have 2 accounts with the same name. At least that's what we uh, assume. You can always have duplicate account name, but it gets kind of tricky if a user have the same account name and same password. Which account are you they're trying to fetch? So it's better to have unique account names. So sent by server response. We need to update the summaries. So when we create an account, we don't want to return the ID. We only want to return the ID when we log in. So login success, we return the ID. Create account, we don't return anything. We just let them know, yes, it succeeds. Okay. So I'll build this. I need to update this on the Unity, and I need to update this in Darkrift. So I'll paste this, replace, and the YouTube tutorial for Unity. I'll delete this. Scripts, network, delete it. And I'll drag this in. Okay. I'll copy and paste this. So remember, we don't expect all the different types of tags from the client. We only expect login and create account. The others are sent by the server, not the client. So we won't need the app version. We won't need this. We won't need this, because we're not going to read the app version. You could send the app version if you want. That's completely up to you. You can send the app version for every call just to double check it's the right app version, but you only generally need one. So instead of get user from credentials, we're going to add user to database. So add user account result. So we're going to do some copy and pasting. So this is create account attempt, create account success, create account failed. And okay, I'm just double checking to see if there are any bugs, because I can never be too sure. Sorry about that. Yes, there's a bug already. So create account success, else if. So here we know that it failed, but why did it fail? We need to distinguish why it failed. So let's go back into our server data structure and create a new error. Before we select, before we add user to database. I'll do something over here. I'll copy and paste something from my previous project, if that's okay, just to save a bit of time. So I'm going to remove the logic for originally I want to block all usernames that have certain keywords just to prevent them from being created, because I want to use them for GM accounts. But I just deleted those. Instead, all I want to return, it's an execute scalar. I haven't shown this being used, but returns an object. So it can return a float, int, or as in this case, a boolean. So what we want to know is if username exists. So before we even create the user, I will write bool does, well actually, if does username exist here, then we want to immediately return. So return new error in using. Let's make a short error. Okay, so username exists. This is not a good practice because we are having a specific string-based error, so it's prone to copy and paste errors. So you should not do this in your game, but you should try to have a variable instead, I think. But let's do this for now. So I need to copy and paste this in two different places. Lib here. Okay, so now we should be able to check else if add user account result dot error equals. I'll copy and paste this. Username exists. Very bad idea, but it works. So if this occurs, we'll send create account failed already exists, and then finally else generic error. I think this covers everything. So I will copy my login plugin into my Darkrift server. Okay, so I will introduce you to the UI for the client. I did a little UI. It's not very fancy, but it took me a bit, like 10 minutes. So I made some updates in the login manager. So one thing I changed is these two. So when I click the login button, I will call login. When I create account, I will call create account, and then it's going to read from input fields. So I have 4 different input fields. Also, whenever the input fields change, I make sure that both fields are filled before I make the button interactable. And again, I will make sure both fields are filled before I make the create user button interactable. Otherwise, you cannot interact with it. And these are from the old demo, so I will update this. Create account success. Create account failed already exists. Great, I think we can run and test this. So I will first boot the Darkrift server. Make sure everything is working. I will refresh the table to make sure that the username is user table is created. It's empty right now. So first test we're going to do is we're going to log in with a username and password. It's not going to work because the table is empty. So here it says we failed to log in. Let's take a look. Login failed. Error in get user from credentials, cannot find user. So that's what we expect. Let's create a user. Let's create a user YouTube 123. And let's log in with YouTube 123. So here we have create account access, right? Success, YouTube 123, account successfully created. So login success, that's great. And let's user ID is 1, so we need to check over here. You can press this button to refresh. So ID is 1. We want to create a new user to double check. So let's create Twitch. Create. Back. So account successfully created. So let's refresh this by clicking this button. So Twitch ID is 2. So if we log in with Twitch, user ID is 2. And we failed to log in. So ideally, after you log in, you want to probably change scene to the character creator, and you probably want to request SQL for more data on your account. For example, what characters do you have? Where are you located in the world? But this is just to be able to fetch and write information to MySQL in Darkrift, and to send the data from between Darkrift server and the Darkrift client, and between Darkrift server and the MySQL. So let's review what we created here. First thing we did, we created a new class called server data structure that's responsible solely for defining object-oriented structures for our server, such as user account, character, armor, that kind of stuff. And it knows how to fetch the information from MySQL. So it knows how to read, it knows how to write, it knows how to manipulate. So that's what it does. So it's able to create the table, ask questions about if there's any, it already exists, insert, delete, and select. Okay, so remember that you have to use parameters like these whenever you do your query, and these fields will replace the placeholders over in the query with the @ symbol. So look for variables with the @ symbol and match the names. This is very error prone because one copy and paste error or one typo will cause your game to crash. It's happened a lot of time with me. I have a different system right now to prevent this problem. Ideally, what you want is you don't want things like username, 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 username to be pasted multiple times because that's error prone. Ideally, what you want is to define it one place and that's it, so you don't have to touch it anymore. And I've successfully created a system where I only have to define it in one place. Also, less copy and paste, less errors. So unfortunately, it looks a little more complicated, so I did not introduce it here. But I introduced the results because I think it's very useful. So after we created the server data structure, we hooked it up to our login plugin so that it's able to send SQL queries without knowing how it works. So we do it by simply calling functions on the data structures that we defined, right? So it's pretty encapsulated. And don't forget that you have to update your network tags whenever you create new logic. It's going to become a bit of a hassle. So after we have a small demo to demonstrate how it works over here. So I'll open up the login manager again so you can see it. The important parts is that if this looks not familiar to you, you can review the first and second tutorial. The important parts are message received over here. For every C Sharp Unity component that you have in Unity, you want to have these right here. Very, very important. So fetch the Unity client. There should be only one in the entire project. And make sure that you register your message received so that whenever your Darkrift server wants to send you some message, you activate this and find out what the message is. So you go through a bunch of switch statements to determine what is the message, and then you react accordingly. So this is very important. You want to make sure that you are querying for the network tags. Great. So I think that is it for this tutorial. I'm pretty sorry that it's not very good quality because I'm very tired right now. Hopefully, I will make more of these tutorials. Maybe I will try to make shorter tutorials, or I will have a bit more pre-built code, such as this, so that I don't have to step through the whole thing because it's gonna be too long for you guys. Anyways, thank you very much for your patience, and hopefully I will see you next time when I update my game or I release a new game. Thank you. Bye.